All right, folks, welcome to another edition of Art Brunch, where we explore the wisdom of the arts, spirituality, and the great ideas. And our subject for today, or at least the collector who created the collection, was a big believer in the arts being a source of spiritual experience and wisdom. So without further ado, we continue our series, America Collects. This time we're going to take a good look at the Barnes Foundation. Now, I gave a talk on this subject a few years ago. Some of you might remember it. But for those of you who've joined the Art Brunch community more recently, this presentation will offer you a glimpse into the cause of my mission in life. You see, many years ago, when I was on track to become an academic focused on the philosophy of religion, I experienced the art collection of Alfred C. Barnes. This portrait of Barnes was painted by the Italian modernist Giorgio de Chirico. Barnes was a self-made multimillionaire, but he's known best for amassing one of the greatest collections of impressionist and post-impressionist art in the world. In that collection are 125 works of African origin, so a very unusual choice for his time, the early 20th century. There are 16 Amedeo Modigliani's. There are 18 works by Henri Rousseau, 22 by Chaim Soutine, 46 works by Pablo Picasso, 59 Henri Matisse's, 69 Cézanne's, and listen to this, 181 works by Pierre-Auguste Renoir, obviously his favorite artist. Now, Barnes was very ahead of his time, not only in his choice of art. While running his pharmaceutical company, Alfred C. Barnes employed mostly people of color and women and set up a pension program for all his workers well before this was a typical practice in large companies. And listen to this, instead of an 8-hour workday, his staff worked 6 hours and studied for 2 hours. Yes, he offered them a high-level education. What did they study? They studied what Barnes was studying, like George Santayana's The Sense of Beauty. They also examined the works of philosophers William James, John Dewey, Bertrand Russell, Friedrich Nietzsche, as well as the literature of Leo Tolstoy, and all while surrounded by works of art that Barnes placed in the factory. So you could say he gave his workers the equivalent of an art brunch presentation every week. Now, these seminars for his workers became so popular that people outside the company wanted to take the courses. So he started the Barnes Foundation in 1922 as a rigorously democratic educational organization using his fabulous collection of artworks to teach his workers and local art students how to think more critically, philosophically, socially, and religiously. Now, the art collection was housed in this building, smack in the middle of a residential neighborhood in Marion, which was a suburb of Philadelphia. Now, you must realize that the vast majority of his workers were not college educated. They were the common man and woman, factory workers, many never graduating from high school. But through examining artworks and the writings of leading thinkers, Alfred wanted his workers to learn how to think critically, as well as cultivate an informed spiritual life in them. Yet despite all of these accomplishments, Barnes was also one of the most disliked individuals of his day. He often tried to establish partnerships with nearby colleges, but would inevitably get upset at their boards of regents and trustees who thought education was best done through books rather than experience. He would write these esteemed academics and civic leaders scathing letters of criticism, calling them, and these are his actual words in these letters, boobs and nincompoops. Sometimes he would write them several letters to make sure that they knew what, quote, morons, unquote, they were. So this sophomoric behavior did not endear him to the Philadelphia establishment. Well, what sort of events and what people shaped such an innovative but caustic person? Well, Alfred C. Barnes was born in Philadelphia in 1872, the same year, by the way, as Leo Stein, who we discussed before. The two would eventually meet in Paris and become good friends. Barnes's father was a butcher who lost his arm in the Civil War, and therefore he couldn't be a butcher anymore. So the family struggled. They moved constantly, probably to escape the rent collector. And they lived in the worst neighborhoods of Philadelphia. So Alfred and his brother were often roughed up by the neighborhood hoodlums. So at age 10, Alfred learned to box, and he claims that that skill ended the bullying in his life. Now, his mother was a devout Methodist, and when Alfred was 8, she took him out into the New Jersey country area for a revival camp meeting. Now, blacks and whites were segregated at the time, and at this camp meeting, there was a partition set up to separate the two groups. But on the final day of the meeting, as a great symbol that there was neither Jew nor Greek, neither slave nor free, neither male nor female, separate in the eyes of God, the partition would be taken down with hammer and axe. This profound religious experience, but also sociological experience when it came to issues of race, it stayed with Alfred Barnes. Barnes knew African-American spirituals, and he would sing them even into his adulthood. He believed that these spirituals were the greatest art form to originate on American soil. Now, Barnes's mother saw to it that her children had a good education, and despite financial constraints, she was able to get Alfred in a top-performing high school. Alfred at one time wanted to be an artist, but a talented fellow student named William Glackens, maybe some of you know that name because he became a well-known artist, but William Glackens looked at his friend Alfred's drawings and laughed at them. So Barnes focused on the sciences instead, and he ended up in the University of Pennsylvania Medical School. This photograph is the medical school's hospital. Barnes graduated in 3 years. He was a very hard worker. He went on to study pharmacology in Germany, and while there he taught himself French and German, and also took time to study philosophy. When he ran out of money, he paid for his trip back to the US by working as a deckhand on a freighter. And back in the US, Barnes and a partner started a pharmaceutical company producing and selling the treatment you see on the left, a treatment for gonorrhea. He became very wealthy and sold the company, listen to this, sold the company for $5 million 3 months before the stock market crash of 1929. How fortuitous. So Barnes had a lot of money when prices, including the price of great artworks, plummeted. Now, one of the most pivotal friendships Barnes had was with the philosopher John Dewey. Barnes, because he admired the pragmatist ideas of William James so much, sought out the most well-known living pragmatist, who is John Dewey. And he attended Dewey's intellectual classes, inviting him over for evenings at his home for food, art, and high-level conversation. At the time, John Dewey did not know much about art, but Barnes taught him to such a deep and vast degree that Dewey ended up writing this seminal work on aesthetics, art as experience, which is still studied today in art schools, as well as university philosophy courses. And I studied that book when I was in seminary. The book is dedicated to Alfred C. Barnes and frankly reveals Barnes's ideas as much as anything original from Dewey. In the book, Dewey quoted this famous line of the poet Keats: "Beauty is truth, and truth beauty. That is all ye know on earth and all ye need to know." Dewey used the line to show how art becomes a kind of revelation in our experience of it. Dewey wrote, "Reasoning must fail man. This, of course, is the doctrine long taught by those who have held the necessity of divine revelation. Keats did not accept this supplement and substitute for reason. The insight of the imagination must suffice. Ultimately, there are but two philosophies. One of them accepts life and experience in all its uncertainty, mystery, doubt, and half-knowledge, and turns that experience upon itself to deepen and intensify its own qualities, to imagination and art. This is the philosophy of Shakespeare and Keats. Well, in that book, Art as Experience, John Dewey also makes a fascinating point about the work of art. He said that the work of art is not actually the art object, the painting, the sculpture, the novel, the poem, or musical score. No, he said the work of art is what happens when we encounter an art object. Hence the title of his book, Art as Experience. Art, then, is a psychological and spiritual energy that the viewer experiences. When a new artwork is seen for the first time, it has little authority, especially the provocative modern art that Barnes was interested in. But some artworks, modern artworks, gain authority because they consistently provoke a deep experience, whether it's intellectual, psychological, or spiritual. And these become a kind of authoritative canon of art. Now, Barnes exhibited his collection in an unusual manner, informed by his study of William James's pragmatism and John Dewey's educational theories. Barnes thought a great problem in the art world was the separation of art from our everyday lives. So Barnes arranged his artwork in what he called ensembles. The art was hung salon style with furniture, metalwork, carvings, and masks also in the room. The idea is to see a variety of art that all have some connection, even though they are from different times and cultures and might be everyday objects like a door hinge, a pitcher, or a bed warmer. By arranging his art this way, Barnes created a full, holistic aesthetic experience while also helping the viewer notice universally pleasing lines and forms by seeing common patterns and features in a gallery. The pleasing line and form and color that moves us aesthetically was not just available in paintings and sculpture, but in other items we may see around our own house or even see in a barn. William James and John Dewey thought that art should be a part of our everyday life. Recall, for example, the famous poem by William Carlos Williams, The Red Wheelbarrow. So much depends upon a red wheelbarrow glazed with rainwater beside the white chickens. All of us have experienced such aesthetically rich and hence spiritually rich moments in our daily comings and goings, haven't we? We don't need to go to museums if we teach ourselves how to observe as an artist observes, even seeing the beauty of a wheelbarrow. That was the point of the Barnes Foundation, to educate us to see the beauty in the everyday. For example, one of our community members, Mike Hamers, who is tuning in, is very gifted in seeing beauty in the everyday. Here's an example. This photo he took of what looks like a wire fence in a field of snow. I think he first posted this with this poem by Jennifer LeBlanc on Facebook, but I've stolen it for use in my presentation. For Barnes, the major problem with art's place in America was its separation from everyday life. We confine art to museums and galleries and thus send a very clear message. The artistic, the beautiful, doesn't belong in daily life. It is a separate thing. It's elite. It's relegated to the few, not for the many. Well, Barnes felt he could use great art, join to it common craft work such as a door hinge oil lamp, a buffet table, or a ceremonial mask, and reveal such common works as every bit as artistic as Picasso, and teach the regular Joe and Jane how to keenly notice and observe everyday beauty so that they would see it more regularly and thus enrich their daily life. From Dewey, Barnes understood that learning is best done hands-on, using the visuals, like his collection, to teach the abstract ideas from those heavy philosophical books. Anybody, Barnes thought, could learn in this way, even his workers who lacked a formal education. In an article for the New Republic, Barnes wrote that his seminars for his workers encouraged an intelligent interest in spiritual things created by living people and in the writings of gifted thinkers, which had been the means of stimulating business life and afforded a sensible use of leisure in a class of people to whom such doors are usually locked. So Barnes had a very democratic understanding of art, and he championed it through his foundation. Now let's look at another example of Barnes' philosophy. This one is a bit humorous. Notice the shape of the objects and the lines in the paintings. In particular, look at the cursive W shape of the ironworks on the top left and right of the wall. Do you see them? Now let your eyes fall down to the Renoir nudes below. Notice any similar lines, forms in these nudes to the wrought iron pieces? Now notice the shape of the chairs below the nudes. You see the similarities, don't you? I can see the large smirk spread across Barnes's face as he assembled these items. Well, despite the humor, try to appreciate the larger ideas behind such an ensemble. Beautiful lines, colors, and forms are everywhere to be seen and appreciated if we only heighten our capacities of perception. In order to teach the average worker or student such wonderful ideas and means to an enriched life, Barnes needed a gifted individual to head up his educational program. You see her here. Violet Demacia would be that person. She was born in Paris, and she taught French in England before moving to Philadelphia in the early 1920s. Shortly thereafter, she began to tutor Dr. Barnes and his staff at the A.C. Barnes Company. And at the same time, she enrolled in the Barnes Foundation's course in art appreciation and philosophy. She was like Barnes, eager to learn and teach, and humble enough to always seek to learn more from others. Over the years, Demacia co-authored several books with Dr. Barnes and was hugely influential in the evolving educational philosophy of the foundation. Here, Demacia is giving a private tour to someone you may recognize, Georgia O'Keeffe. But notice the painting that they're looking at. Let's take a look at that work, Cézanne's Card Players. It took Barnes years to acquire this painting, which he finally accomplished in 1925. We don't need to overly analyze this work to appreciate it. We are drawn immediately into the activity of these farm workers playing cards. There is a sense of intense concentration among the players, which an observer, the child to the right, expresses with alluring curiosity. Viewing this work, we relate to the enjoyment and fellowship which occurs among friends enjoying a card game. Also, there is a wonderful balance that we feel in the composition. Look at the positioning of the five people. Now notice the five objects on the table, 4 cards and a pipe, which reflect the 5 individuals around the table. Words like balance, harmony, when used to describe a work of art, now make sense to us because we've taken time to notice. By painting such a subject on a large scale with almost life-size figures, Cézanne was able to cause in the viewer, maybe unconsciously, a means of associating the scene with other similar subject matter in great art that we've seen in other museums, like a Caravaggio, who depicted card players as well. In Caravaggio's work, it's highly dramatic. It's a moment of cheating with potentially dire consequences. Notice the knife in the pocket of the figure on the right. But Cézanne was more familiar with this work and probably based his own card players on it. Gustave Caillebotte was his friend. Notice his version of a card players. It's intense, but not as overly dramatic as Caravaggio's work. Cezanne's card players are more relaxed, I'd say, though still highly engaged in the game. For Barnes, such an image is an example of the everyday satisfying aesthetic experience we have of intellectual engagement in a game, balanced with camaraderie. How often do we notice, while playing a game with friends or family, the richness of the moment? Such a work by Cezanne, when thoughtfully analyzed and reflected upon, teaches us to recognize and relish such moments. For Barnes to include such a work in his collection, he seems to ask us rhetorically, isn't this a sacred moment as well? Moments of grace in our ordinary day amongst ordinary objects while participating in ordinary activities. Now, I derived the following insights from one of the Barnes Foundation's daily art talks. You can find them on Google. This art talk was by Amy Gillette, who works in collections at the Barnes. She spoke about this object. She used the oil lamp to discuss why Barnes placed ironworks with paintings. Barnes stated his reasons. He said, one, the motifs in paintings have their analogs in ironwork. Look at the form and structure in the metals. They mirror the forms in the paintings. The Modigliani nudes, curves can be seen in the oil lamp. And two, Barnes said a creator of wrought iron is as authentic an artist as Titian, Renoir, or Cezanne. Now that's quite a statement. Do you believe it's true? This lamp is in the shape of a dragon with an Ouroboros on top and a turtle for a base. Now that's a very strange, perplexing combination. But it's also an invitation then to study it at length. Look at the shapes of these hinges, belt buckle, and some metal object with a bird's head. Look at the forms, the line, and yes, the artistry. The formal structure of these everyday objects are found also in the paintings and furniture that accompany these metalworks. How often do we take pleasure in the lines and forms of the furniture in our living rooms or the items in our kitchens? Barnes also collected African masks and sculpture. Look again at the Modigliani women to the left and right of the glass case with the masks. Look at the two small portraits by Picasso above the case on the left and right. Notice the similarities. Many of you are familiar with this work because I've discussed it before. The Joy of Life is the English translation. It's by Matisse. It's very large, 6 feet by 8 feet. Gertrude and Leo Stein originally bought this painting of an earthly paradise of innocence. Such a provocative modern art work like this was a protest against what was perceived as the dehumanizing aspects of the industrial age, and the nudity was a protest against, believe it or not, the Victorian dress, which we see on the right, which, despite the appearance of this woman's relaxed posture, let's face it, such a dress cut off the circulation of blood and oxygen. But also, in Matisse's eyes, it cut off the liberating natural energies inside of the woman. Matisse's work calls us to a different way of living, one in tune with our natural instincts to play and enjoy nature with a carefree spirit of freedom. Barnes saw in modern art, like this painting by Pierre Bernard, the pragmatist understanding that the aesthetic, the artistic, the beautiful is found in everyday moments, like writing. Aesthetic experience is like a moment of grace punctuating our everyday experience. Barnes particularly saw this capacity of experience in the spiritual life of his African-American workers. Therefore, the Barnes collection includes works by an artist of color, Horace Pippin. Barnes included this artist not simply to inspire his Black workers, but because he believed artists of color had not received their just due in American society. Barnes also supported Black churches, Black schools, the NAACP. In his will, he left an historically Black school, Lincoln University, in charge of his art collection in the foundation. This work by Horace Pippin is titled Giving Thanks. In a way, Barnes related more to the Black experience than to his elite neighbors in Marion, many of whom thought Barnes was uncouth, unsophisticated, lacking proper breeding. That is one reason Barnes despised anyone who issued a sense of elitism, like academics and administrators of the universities and colleges around him. Barnes also held on to that childhood memory of old-time religion, still hearing the dynamic singing of Black spirituals at the revival meeting. Art and its capacity to elicit spiritual experience was a path back to such moments of childhood, when Barnes felt something of the divine creator deep in his heart and soul. Art continued to offer such moments of grace for him because art had given him the critical and discerning eyes to see and ears to hear the beauty in the everyday. Now, this work by Horace Pippin is a simple depiction of a regular meal, but it's a sacred meal. We could all experience as sacred if we took the time to perceive it as such. This work by Pippin is titled Christ and the Woman of Samaria. Many of you are probably familiar with that story in the Gospels. Art offered Alfred C. Barnes the living water that Christ spoke of to the Samaritan woman. Well, I hope this brief visit with the Barnes collection has offered you some of that spiritual living water as well. Walking through the galleries of the Foundation is an amazing experience. It's one that I greatly appreciate every time I visit Philadelphia. And I hope you can one day experience it for yourself. Well, thank you very much for your attention. I hope you are inspired to see this wonderful collection. Any comments or questions? The floor is now open.